Trapped by my husband's gambling addiction, a night of terror that changed everything. The rough fibers of the rope bit into my wrists as I dangled from the ceiling, freezing water cascading over me in relentless streams. Samuel's face twisted with fury, his eyes wild with desperation. "You really think you can say no to me?" he roared. My chest tightened with sheer panic, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The sharp sting in my wrists grew unbearable, but I fought against the restraints, twisting, straining, desperate for any chance to break free. "My name is Rebecca, and I never imagined my life would come to this. I live in Portland, Oregon, with my precious daughter, Olivia." Looking back, I can barely recognize the woman I used to be, the one who once believed in fairy tales, in love, in happily ever afters. There was a time when my world felt warm and full of promise. But that illusion shattered the moment Samuel revealed his true self. We met at a friend's party, and from the very first moment, he seemed perfect. He was charismatic, effortlessly funny, and so full of energy that I couldn't help but be drawn to him. Within a year, we were married. Not long after, Olivia was born. I thought we were building a life filled with love and stability, but piece by piece, things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. Samuel became more critical, more dismissive of my feelings. He expected everything to revolve around him, and when it didn't, his frustration surfaced in sharp remarks that cut deeper than I wanted to admit. "Rebecca, the house better be spotless when I get back," he'd say, his voice laced with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. I told myself he was just stressed, that work was getting to him. But his words carried a weight I couldn't shake. Any attempt to express how I felt was met with cold indifference. "You're overreacting," he'd say. "You always make a big deal out of nothing." Over time, I felt myself shrinking, fading into the background of my own home. Then there was Laura, Samuel's younger sister. She was aimless, bouncing from one fleeting ambition to the next, but Samuel doted on her, enabling her reckless lifestyle. "She's family," he'd insist whenever I questioned why she was constantly intruding in our home, treating it like her personal escape. She came and went as she pleased, demanding attention, disrupting our lives, and Samuel never said no to her. Meanwhile, my needs, my concerns, were brushed aside like they didn't matter. But the real nightmare began when Samuel started gambling. At first, it seemed harmless, a casual hobby, nothing more. Then the losses began to pile up. The first time I discovered the extent of it, I was floored. He had blown through our savings, and yet, he still wanted more. I was saving for Olivia's future, for her education, for her dreams. But Samuel didn't care. He was drowning in debt, and he expected me to hand over the only financial security we had left. I refused, and that refusal pushed him over the edge. That night, I saw a side of Samuel I had never seen before. His anger was unrecognizable, feral, unhinged. When I stood my ground, he snapped. Before I knew what was happening, he had bound my wrists, hoisted me up, and turned on the ice-cold water, letting it drench me as he raged, demanding the money. But no matter how much he yelled, no matter how much he tried to break me, I couldn't give in. Not when Olivia's future was at stake. I could barely feel my fingers, my body trembling from the cold, but my mind was racing. I had to get out. I had to get to Olivia. Gritting my teeth, I twisted my hands against the rope, ignoring the pain as it tore at my skin. Slowly, agonizingly, I felt the knot loosen. Just a little more. The moment my wrist slipped free, I didn't hesitate. I wrenched my other hand loose and dropped to the floor, my body collapsing in a heap. My legs wobbled beneath me, but I forced myself up. There was no time for hesitation. I had to find Olivia. Escaping the nightmare, a mother's fight for freedom. I sprinted to Olivia's room, my pulse hammering in my ears. She was curled up in the corner, her tiny frame trembling as she clutched her teddy bear. The moment she saw me, her tear-filled eyes widened with fear. "Mommy, what's happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as if I could shield her from the terror that still lingered in the air. "We're leaving, sweetheart," I murmured, my voice shaking but resolute. "We're going somewhere safe." There was no time to waste. I grabbed a small bag, my hands trembling as I stuffed in a few clothes and Olivia's beloved teddy bear. Every movement felt agonizingly slow, the seconds stretching into eternity. My mind raced, anticipating the moment Samuel would realize what I was doing. I could still hear him in the other room, muttering angrily to himself, oblivious to my escape plan. Taking a deep breath, I gripped Olivia's hand and led her quietly through the house. My heart pounded as we slipped out the front door into the biting cold night. The darkness wrapped around us, but I didn't stop to look back. Every instinct screamed at me to move faster. I fumbled with the car keys, my fingers numb with fear. The moment I got Olivia into her seat, I threw the car into gear and sped away. The silence in the car was heavy, but Olivia held on to her teddy bear like a lifeline, her small body curled up in the back seat. Tears blurred my vision as I drove, my emotions a tangled mess of fear, anger, and overwhelming relief. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. Not after what Samuel had done. Hours later, we finally arrived at my parents' house. The moment my mother opened the door, the sight of her concerned face nearly shattered me. "Rebecca, what happened?" she asked, pulling me into a firm embrace. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The sobs came in waves as I choked out everything. The gambling, the threats, the violence. My mother stroked my hair, whispering reassurances as my father paced the living room, his fists clenched in barely contained fury. "You and Olivia are staying here," he declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Samuel will never lay a hand on you again. I'll make damn sure of it." For the first time in what felt like forever, I exhaled. I was safe. Olivia was safe. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The next morning, a sense of clarity settled over me. I refused to live in fear any longer. Samuel had crossed an unforgivable line, and I had to protect Olivia, not just from him, but from the danger he had entangled himself in. I picked up the phone and called a lawyer. Jenna Parker was sharp, experienced, and fierce in the courtroom. She immediately set the divorce process in motion, filing for full custody of Olivia. But even that wasn't enough. Samuel needed to face the consequences of his actions. I took a deep breath and dialed the police. My hands trembled as I recounted every horrifying detail of that night. The officers took my statement seriously, and soon, an official investigation was underway. As the days passed, the case against Samuel strengthened. Neighbors who had overheard our arguments came forward, sharing what they had witnessed, the bruises I had tried to hide, the nights they had heard Olivia crying. Jenna even hired a private investigator to dig into Samuel's finances, and the truth they uncovered sent shivers down my spine. Samuel wasn't just gambling. He was drowning in debt to some very dangerous people. His recklessness hadn't just threatened our finances. It had put our entire family at risk. Every revelation felt like a knife to my heart, but it only fueled my determination. I had spent years walking on eggshells, living in the shadow of his control. No more. I was going to fight, not just for me, but for Olivia, for our future. And this time, I wasn't backing down. The final verdict, breaking free from my abuser. The day of the court hearing arrived, a day I had both dreaded and longed for. As I stepped into the courtroom, my parents flanked me on either side, their presence a silent pillar of strength. Jenna walked beside me, her confidence unwavering, ready to fight for Olivia and me. Across the room, Samuel sat stiffly in his chair, his expression carefully blank, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He was used to control, to bending reality to his will. But today he would face the truth. Beside him, as expected, sat Laura. Her ever-present smirk curled on her lips, as if she found the entire ordeal amusing. She had always defended Samuel, always enabled him, no matter how much damage he caused. But I didn't look at her for long. She didn't matter. What mattered was justice. For Olivia, for myself, for the years of fear and suffering I had endured. Jenna began our case with ruthless precision, dissecting Samuel's life piece by piece. She detailed his gambling addiction, the staggering debts he had accumulated, and the reckless choices that had driven our family to the brink. Then came the testimonies. Neighbors recounted the violent arguments, the bruises they had seen, the nights they had heard Olivia crying through the walls. The prosecution laid out photographic evidence of my injuries, stark and undeniable proof of the violence I had endured in silence for far too long. Samuel's lawyer fought back, spinning weak excuses. He painted Samuel as a man under stress, claiming his actions were out of character, that he never truly meant to hurt me. He tried to frame the gambling as a temporary setback, something that any struggling man could fall victim to. But the evidence was damning. Each testimony, each photo, each document chipped away at whatever confidence Samuel had left. I watched as his bravado faltered, his fingers clenching the arms of his chair. And then, it was my turn. My legs felt unsteady as I walked to the witness stand, but I forced myself to stand tall. My hands trembled as I took the oath, but my voice was steady as I spoke. I told my story. From the first time Samuel dismissed my feelings, to the slow, creeping control he exerted over my life. I described the night he tied me up, the icy water pouring over me, the terror in Olivia's eyes when I finally broke free. I let the courtroom hear my pain, my fear, and, most importantly, my resolve. I just want to protect my daughter, I said, my voice breaking but strong. Samuel is a danger to both of us, and I can't allow him to keep hurting us. I won't. A heavy silence filled the room as I finished. I let my eyes drift to Samuel, but he didn't meet my gaze. His expression was unreadable now, his earlier arrogance gone. The judge sat back, her face unreadable as she sifted through the evidence, her fingers pressing together in deep thought. My heart pounded, my breath shallow as I waited. This was it. The weight of every sleepless night, every moment of terror, every ounce of courage it had taken to leave, it all led to this. Finally, the judge lifted her gaze. After reviewing all the evidence and hearing the testimonies, she began, her voice calm but firm. It is clear that Mr. Samuel Carter has engaged in both physical and emotional abuse against Mrs. Rebecca Carter. The evidence also confirms his reckless gambling habits and the financial harm he has inflicted on his family. This behavior is unacceptable. My fingers dug into the arms of my chair as she continued. I find Mr. Carter guilty of domestic abuse and aggravated assault. A shuddering breath escaped me. My mother squeezed my hand. My father let out a quiet, relieved exhale. Across the room, Samuel had gone pale. His hands clenched into fists, but there was nothing he could do. Not anymore. Given the severity of these actions and the clear danger posed to both Mrs. Carter and their daughter Olivia, the judge continued. I am sentencing Mr. Carter to a term of imprisonment. I barely heard the years she announced. I only knew that he was going away, that Olivia and I were free. And furthermore, the judge added, her voice unwavering, full custody of Olivia Carter is awarded to Mrs. Rebecca Carter. Mr. Carter will have no legal rights to contact his daughter during his incarceration. Tears welled in my eyes. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. Samuel had spent years believing he was untouchable, that I would always be too afraid to fight back. But today he had lost. I had won. For the first time in years, I was free. And I was never looking back. A new beginning, reclaiming our lives. It felt as if a crushing weight had finally been lifted from my chest. The fear, the anxiety, the endless sleepless nights, everything that had haunted me for years, began to dissolve. Samuel was going to prison. Olivia and I were free. I turned to Jenna, my lawyer, who gave me a warm, reassuring smile. You did it, Rebecca, she whispered. Her words settled over me like a soothing balm, reminding me that this battle, the hardest fight of my life, was finally over. Across the room, Samuel sat frozen, his face unreadable. The realization of what had just happened was sinking in, but there was nothing he could do. Not anymore. His control over me had ended the moment the judge delivered her verdict. Beside him, Laura, his ever-loyal sister, who had spent the entire trial smirking in misplaced confidence, now looked stunned, as if she had just woken up to a nightmare she never saw coming. But none of that mattered anymore. Samuel no longer had power over me. Over Olivia. I turned away from them, stepping out of the courtroom, feeling lighter with every step. The sun shone brightly against the clear blue sky, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp, fresh air. Freedom had a feeling, and it was this. It was the ability to breathe without fear. Waiting for me just outside the courthouse were my parents. The moment they saw me, they rushed forward, enveloping me in the warmth of their embrace. It's over, I whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. He's gone. My father held me close, his voice thick with emotion. We're so proud of you, Rebecca. You fought for yourself, for Olivia, and now you can finally move forward. And that was exactly what I did. The weeks that followed were a blur of rebuilding, of putting the shattered pieces of our lives back together, but this time, with hope guiding every step. Olivia and I stayed with my parents while I searched for a new place to live. It was a strange transition, learning to exist outside of fear, learning how to trust in the quiet, in the safety of a home where I no longer had to look over my shoulder. Jenna helped finalize the divorce, ensuring that legally, Samuel would never have a hold over us again. But healing wasn't just about legal battles. It was about finding my own strength again. I started attending a support group for survivors of domestic abuse. Sitting in that circle, surrounded by women who had faced their own nightmares, I found something I hadn't expected: solidarity. These women understood me in ways no one else could. We shared our fears, our heartbreaks, our struggles to rebuild. And eventually, we shared our victories. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that even after the darkest storm, there was still light. One afternoon, after dropping Olivia off at her new preschool, I found the place. A small, cozy apartment not far from my parents' house. It wasn't much, but it was perfect. A fresh start. A home untouched by painful memories. Moving in felt symbolic, like shedding the last remnants of the past. The rooms were empty, but they echoed with possibility. I decorated Olivia's room with her favorite colors, filling it with books and toys that brought her joy. As she ran around, giggling in the open space, I watched her, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: pure, unfiltered happiness. Each night, as I tucked Olivia into bed, she would look up at me with those big, innocent eyes and ask, "Are we really safe, Mommy?" And every night, I would kiss her forehead, smile, and whisper, "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe now." Life slowly found a new rhythm, a normal that no longer carried the weight of fear. I returned to my passion for graphic design, landing a job that allowed me to provide for Olivia while doing something I loved. My parents remained my unwavering support system, always just a phone call away. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I woke up each morning feeling something I never thought I'd have again: peace. I had fought for my freedom. I had fought for my daughter. And we had won. The end of one chapter, the beginning of another. Months passed, and life continued moving forward, each day bringing a little more peace, a little more light. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. The sight of the official envelope sent a ripple of unease through me. Even after all this time, the idea of Samuel still had the power to make my stomach tighten. With a steadying breath, I opened it. Samuel had attempted to appeal his sentence. A chill ran down my spine. For a split second, fear tried to creep back in, whispering doubts, making me question whether justice would hold firm. But then, I read the next line. His appeal had been denied. The original decision stood. The system had not wavered. He would serve his full sentence. I exhaled deeply, the tension in my shoulders melting away as I absorbed those words. This was the final nail in the coffin of a life I had fought so hard to escape. No loopholes. No second chances. Samuel was exactly where he belonged, and there was no way for him to reach us. For the first time in years, I felt something settle inside me: true closure. It was over. Truly, completely over. Olivia and I embraced our new life, free from the weight of the past. We spent weekends at the park, letting the wind carry our laughter into the open air. Evenings were filled with board games, bedtime stories, and the simple joys that once felt like distant dreams. Gone were the nights of lying awake in fear. Gone were the days of flinching at sudden noises or dreading what might come next. Now, I woke up each morning feeling something foreign but wonderful: peace. I was no longer just surviving. I was living. With time, I found myself reflecting on how far we had come. The scars of the past would always exist, woven into the fabric of our story. But they no longer defined us. They no longer dictated our future. We had broken free. We were moving forward, building something new, something safe, something beautiful. Olivia thrived, her laughter filling every space that had once been shadowed by fear. She ran, played, and dreamed without hesitation, her little heart unburdened by the past we had left behind. Watching her grow, seeing the sparkle in her eyes, I knew every battle I had fought, every tear I had shed, every painful step it had taken to leave, it had all been worth it. I had reclaimed my life. I was no longer a prisoner of my past, no longer just a victim. I was a survivor. And as I watched Olivia chase butterflies in the golden light of the setting sun, I knew one thing for certain. Our future was no longer clouded by fear. It was bright. It was ours. And we were finally free.